The poor girl only had $50 for a blind date. The single dad CEO at the next table watched her and paid for the entire dinner. The restaurant hummed softly with the sounds of weeknight diners, a gentle murmur of conversation. Soft music, the subtle clinking of glasses and silverware tapping porcelain. Flickering candlelight from each table cast warm shadows against the deep wooden booths and navy linens. Though not a five-star establishment, it was the nicest place Haley had ever visited for a date, and she stepped inside with a touch of hesitation. The bell above the door chimed perhaps a little too loudly, announcing her arrival. Her hands instinctively smoothed the sides of her dress, a vintage pearl-colored piece fitted at the waist, its fabric just starting to fray at the edges. It was her mother's, worn only once before to her college graduation years ago. Tonight it felt like both armor and hope. Earlier that afternoon, in her tiny apartment, she had curled her blonde hair and carefully applied a touch of makeup, a luxury she could barely afford. Her lips were a soft pink, but her nerves were undeniable, laid bare for anyone to see. A hostess approached with a polite smile, and Haley announced her reservation, her voice firmer than she felt. "Haley, right this way." She followed the woman to a small table by the window where the soft glow of the light above seemed to wait for something to unfold. Haley sat with careful precision, her purse clutched in her lap, knees drawn close beneath the table. A quick glance at her watch showed 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes early. Good. She thought she needed time to breathe. Maybe, just maybe, this time will be different. She scanned the room, feigning casualness, but her eyes kept darting back to the entrance. She had met him, Aaron, on a dating app. He had seemed kind, thoughtful, not pushy. His messages were short but sweet, and though she had initially hesitated when he suggested this restaurant, she had eventually said yes. It had taken months to agree to a date with anyone, years, if she were truly honest with herself. Not far from Haley, a man in a charcoal gray suit stirred a glass of scotch. Ethan Blake's posture was relaxed, but his eyes held a subtle intensity. He had just emerged from yet another long meeting, a common occurrence lately, but the day's tension seemed to dissipate as his gaze found the young woman by the window. She had entered with such clear hope, accompanied by a slight tremor, and something about her stirred a memory within him. She brought him back to a time when he too believed that significant moments could begin with a mere glance across a room. As 15 minutes turned into 30, Haley grew increasingly restless. She checked her phone again, no messages. She reread Aaron's last text from that afternoon. "Can't wait to see you tonight." She forced a smile, as if to convince herself it had been genuine. At 7:15, she sent a tentative message. "Hey, I'm here. Just checking in." Still there was no reply. She continued to wait, her eyes lifting hopefully each time the entrance door opened, trying hard not to fidget too much with her napkin. By 7:30, her patience waned and she made a call. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. A server approached her table gently. "Miss, would you like to go ahead and order something? We're starting to fill up." Haley blinked, momentarily flustered. "Oh, I'm actually waiting for someone, just a little longer." The server offered a polite nod and moved away, leaving Haley alone with her growing apprehension. Haley opened her small purse, revealing a crumpled $5 bill, her emergency fund, to be truthful. She hadn't planned on ordering much, perhaps just tea if absolutely necessary, but she had secretly hoped her date would arrive and offer to share a meal. She had hoped for so much more than this lonely wait. Suddenly, her phone buzzed with a new message. She opened it. "Wow, you actually went. I was just messing with you. Sorry, but you're not really my type. Not worth the Uber." Another message followed immediately. "You seem nice, but seriously, you thought I was actually coming." The screen blurred before her eyes. She blinked hard, fighting back the burning sting of tears, her jaw tightening with raw emotion. The laughter of couples, the movement of waiters, the clinking of glasses, all the ambient noise around her dissolved into a distant static. Her fingers curled into a tight grip around her napkin. She would not cry. Not here. Ethan, still observing from a nearby table, saw the exact moment she put her phone down. He hadn't heard the cruel words, but he had witnessed enough, the swift draining of color from her face, the way she straightened her spine as if it were the only thing holding her upright. And in that rigid posture he recognized a profound familiarity. Long ago he too had waited not for a date to arrive, but for someone to truly believe he was enough. Haley sat still for a long moment, her fingers trembling around the napkin in her lap. Her face was pale, her eyes dry yet glassy, conveying a profound inner ache. A tautness in her posture suggested a desperate wish to disappear, to shrink small enough to slip through the cracks of the tiled floor. Ethan continued to watch from his table silently. He hadn't intended to stay after his own dinner, but the young woman by the window had captivated him from the moment she walked in, with a look in her eyes that was a poignant blend of bravery and fear. Now only the quiet ache of disappointment marred her face like a spreading bruise. He noticed her subtle shift in her seat, a hand pressed gently against her stomach. She was hungry not just emotionally, but physically. She had only been drinking water. Her eyes darted towards the server station, as if calculating how much longer she could remain before being asked to leave. Slowly, as if each movement bore an immense weight, she reached for her coat and stood up. Her purse already clutched in her hand, she turned towards the door, her steps hesitant. Just as she began to move, a server appeared beside her, holding a plate of warm, fragrant pasta and a glass of sparkling lemonade. "Excuse me, miss," the server said with a smile. "Your order." Haley blinked, utterly confused. I didn't order anything." The server reassured her. "It was taken care of. Someone requested it for you, and your tab has been covered." Haley froze. Her brows furrowed as she looked around, uncertain. Her first instinct was fear. Was this another cruel trick, some kind of joke? Then a calm, low voice came from just behind her. "It's not charity," Ethan said. "It's a reminder. You deserve to eat, even if the world tries to tell you otherwise." Haley turned, startled, to find Ethan standing, one hand resting casually on the back of his chair. His expression was inscrutable, save for the soft honesty shining in his eyes. He wasn't trying to impress her, nor was he pitying her. He simply saw her. Without waiting for an invitation, he pulled out the chair opposite hers and sat down. A brief silence stretched between them. Then he spoke softly. "Take care of your stomach before you try taking care of someone else's heart." Haley slowly sat back down, her eyes wide with surprise. This was not the kind of line she had expected. It wasn't a pickup, nor an insult. It was simply true. No one had ever spoken to her so gently, yet struck so deeply. She looked down at the food, her hand still resting in her lap. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured. "I know," he replied. Another silence followed, but this one felt less awkward, more honest. Haley glanced at him again. He exuded an aura of expense, the kind of man she would never imagine sitting across from her voluntarily. His tailored suit, his understated yet clearly high-end watch all bespoke wealth. Yet his face was calm, curious, and undeniably kind. She cleared her throat. "You don't know me." "True," Ethan conceded, "but I saw enough." She hesitated, then asked, "And what exactly did you see?" He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice low. "Someone who showed up, someone who hoped, someone who waited longer than she should have, not out of desperation, but because she believed. That still matters." Her throat tightened. No one had ever articulated it that way before. People always labeled her as naive, soft-hearted, too hopeful for her own good. But this stranger, this man with gentle eyes, had, without explicitly saying it, called her brave. She finally lifted her fork and took a bite. The food was warm, substantial, and truly the first proper meal she'd had in days. Ethan watched her for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. "I didn't mean to interfere," he said, "but you reminded me of someone I used to be." Haley looked up. "And who is that?" He offered a faint smile. "A guy who thought he needed to be something else to be worth showing up for." Her eyes softened. An unspoken understanding passed between them, a small flicker of recognition. She still felt small, still out of place, But somehow, with him sitting there, not pitying her, not mocking her, she felt a profound sense of permission. Permission to exist at that table, to eat, to breathe, to simply be seen. Haley remained seated long after her plate was empty, a lingering fullness in her chest, a weight of unspoken thoughts and emotions she didn't know how to articulate. When Ethan finally stood to leave, he simply slid a small card across the table, devoid of pressure or expectation. "I come here often for coffee, not company." Her eyes, still a little guarded, met his. He offered a small nod, more an expression of understanding than a farewell, and then he left. A week went by, filled with classes, work, library shifts, and late-night studying. Haley tried to dismiss the memory of that evening, but Ethan's words, both spoken and unspoken, persisted. She hadn't anticipated him seeing her so profoundly or responding with such genuine kindness without asking for anything in return. Then, on a quiet Thursday morning, she found herself walking into a cozy cafe nestled between the community college library and the bookstore. It was a place she only afforded when her budget stretched, usually for a plain black coffee and the promise of free Wi-Fi. As she fumbled with her worn coin purse at the counter, a familiar voice reached her ears. "Make that 2, Ethan said to the barista. "She looks like someone who might need oat milk today." Haley turned surprised to see him in the corner, laptop open, sleeves rolled up, the same calm smile gracing his face. "You remembered my name," she said softly, sitting down with the cup he handed her. "I remembered your courage," he replied. Name was the easy part. She blinked, unsure how to respond, but his words ignited a small, tired warmth within her. They settled into a comfortable silence. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting soft gold streaks across their table. The air carried the inviting scents of cinnamon and roasted beans, creating a space that encouraged conversation, but only if it unfolded naturally. "You work around here?" Haley eventually asked. He nodded. "Sometimes this place is close to one of our product research partners." Haley offered a polite smile, unsure how to continue the conversation. Ethan leaned back slightly, then unexpectedly shared, "You know, I completely botched our last campaign. We tried to push a new toddler snack line, and the slogan ended up sounding like we were promoting chewing gum for babies. It was definitely not our proudest moment." Haley let out a small, genuine laugh. He continued recounting how a food influencer had mercilessly roasted them online, complete with a viral meme. He told the story not with arrogance or self-deprecation, but with the kind of humor that comes from someone who has learned not to take failure personally. Haley felt herself relax. There was no pity, no probing questions about her past, no awkward comments about that dinner. It was simply a man sharing a story, not as a CEO, but as a person. She sipped her coffee. "That slogan sounds like something my anatomy professor would hate," she remarked. He grinned. "I could use someone like you in the copywriting department." She raised a brow. "I'm a broke nursing student, not a branding expert." "Exactly," he countered. "You read people better than the marketers do." They chatted for a while longer about coffee preferences, unusual childhood snacks, and her ill-fated attempt to cut her own bangs with safety scissors. The lightness of their interaction surprised her. When she eventually stood to leave, she half expected him to say something to prolong the moment, but he simply smiled, nodded, and let her go. No pressure, no invitation, just respect. As she walked away, Haley realized she was smiling again, not because someone had rescued her, but because someone had genuinely listened, remembered, and laughed with her. For the first time in years, she felt she had shared a table out of choice, not desperation. And perhaps, just perhaps, that made all the difference. The conference room, modest, yet thoughtfully arranged, featured white folding chairs facing a screen displaying colorful slides of cartoon vegetables and smiling toddlers. A long table at the back offered an array of fruit cups, granola samples, and boxed smoothies, all proudly branded Blaine Organics. Haley sat in the third row, a notepad in her lap, her pen poised. She wore her light blue scrub top beneath a simple cardigan, her hair neatly pulled back into a low bun. Around her were young mothers, a few pediatricians, and a couple of curious nutrition students. Events like this were a rarity for her. Typically, she couldn't afford the time or the registration fees. However, a week prior, Ethan had sent a personal invitation with a waived fee, noting, "Thought this might align with your studies, no pressure." So she came. The presenter began with early childhood nutrition, food safety, and allergen awareness in store-bought products. As the slides advanced, Haley raised her hand twice. Once she inquired about preservative levels in toddler snacks. Another time she pointed out a discrepancy in the allergy labeling system. Both times the speaker paused, visibly surprised. "That's a great question," he said after her second observation, "and a really sharp observation." Ethan, observing quietly from the back in a navy blazer, had seen countless ambitious interns, sharp employees, and confident experts. Yet there was something uniquely rare about Haley's voice. She wasn't seeking to impress anyone, she simply cared deeply. She asked questions like someone who would one day be in a position to save a life because of them. After the workshop, while others mingled around the snack table or exchanged resumes, Haley quietly slipped out, heading towards the library down the block. She cherished this library, a warm, welcoming space tucked between two office buildings, boasting a quiet study room with a view of a tiny garden. She had always thought of it as a secret haven for those striving to grow much like the plants outside. She hadn't expected to find Ethan there, but as she pushed open the glass door, he was standing by the children's reading corner, holding the hand of a small girl in a yellow sweater dress. Haley blinked in surprise. Ethan looked up and smiled. "Hey," he said gently, drawing the little girl behind him. "Wasn't sure I'd see you here." I just came to return a few books," she replied, holding up the small stack in her arms. Her eyes drifted to the child, who now peeked out from behind Ethan's legs. "This is Lily," he said softly. "My daughter." Haley's eyebrows lifted slightly. Ethan's voice softened further, becoming more careful. "She's 3, a little shy at first." Haley crouched down, offering a gentle smile. "Hi, Lily." The girl blinked up at her, hesitant, then slowly stepped forward, her tiny hand reaching out to touch the hem of Haley's cardigan. "She's pretty," Lily declared to no one in particular. Haley chuckled. "You're very pretty, too." A pause hung in the air. Then Lily leaned close, sniffed the space near Haley's shoulder, and whispered, "She smells like Mommy." The air stilled. Ethan's expression froze, his breath catching the kind of silence that fractures with raw memory. Haley remained still, unsure how to react, the weight of the child's words settling heavily between them. She glanced at Ethan. His face was unreadable, but his hands gripping Lily's small shoulder trembled noticeably. Haley knelt again, matching the child's height. Her voice was gentle, careful. "Well," she said softly, "that's a big compliment. Your mommy must have smelled like kindness." Lily nodded solemnly. Ethan looked away, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. He blinked twice, then cleared his throat. "Okay, sweet pea," he murmured. "Let's go pick a book." Lily scampered off towards the picture books. Ethan lingered for a moment, his eyes still slightly unfocused, then turned to Haley. "She passed 2 years ago," he said quietly. "Lily doesn't usually say that." Haley nodded, understanding more than she could articulate. Children remember more with their hearts than their heads. He looked at her, then truly looked, and for the first time something in his gaze was not guarded but entirely open. Their connection began with shared moments that felt more like natural interaction than obligation. Haley would stop by Ethan's office about once a week, sometimes simply to drop off freshly annotated documents from his latest research on toddler nutrition. Other times, she would stay a little longer, sipping tea quietly in the corner as he reviewed slides for an upcoming product pitch. She possessed a unique knack for spotting inconsistencies and asking the very questions real mothers would one day pose about product labels. Ethan valued her insights more than those of most consultants he had ever hired. But it wasn't solely about work. It was her quiet, thoughtful, and undemanding presence that made those moments so meaningful. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, whenever his nanny had classes or emergencies, Ethan would call Haley not as a last resort, but because Lily responded to her in a way that smoothed the edges of their routine. Haley would pick Lily up from daycare carefully, braid her hair before bed, and always read exactly 2 books, never 1, never 3. It became an unspoken, yet deeply familiar arrangement. Haley never pried into Ethan's past, and he never pushed her about hers. There were no declarations of feelings, no grand romantic gestures. Yet when she laughed, he found himself watching for a beat too long. And when he worked late, he'd sometimes draft a message to tell her something silly Lily had said only to delete it before sending. Their connection was fragile and real, blossoming in these subtle ways. Then one evening the line between friendly help and something more profound began to blur. Lily had a low-grade fever. Ethan had stayed home from work juggling frantic Zoom calls with thermometer checks and lukewarm soup. By 4 p.m., exhaustion had claimed him. At 4:30, a gentle knock announced Haley's arrival, a small canvas bag in hand. "You didn't sound okay on the phone," she said simply. He let her in. The house carried a faint scent of lemon and medicine. Lily lay on the couch under a thin blanket, her cheeks flushed, and her eyes fluttered open when Haley approached, reaching out wordlessly. Haley sat beside her, gently, ran a cool hand across her forehead, then produced something from her bag, a soft towel soaked in an herbal compress wrapped in wax paper to keep it cool. "I used to love this at the hospital," Haley explained. "A little lavender helps the head and the heart." Ethan watched as she carefully pressed the towel against Lily's forehead. Lily let out a soft breath and closed her eyes. Minutes passed. Haley began to hum under her breath, the softest lullaby, then started to sing so quietly it could almost be mistaken for just breathing. Ethan froze. He knew that song. He hadn't heard it in almost 3 years. It was the lullaby his wife used to hum when Lily was small enough to sleep in their bed after a bad dream, a gentle folk melody altered with nonsense lyrics and a line that always made Lily giggle. "The moon wears socks when it's cold at night." Haley sang it word for word. Ethan's knees buckled slightly, and he sank into the armchair behind her, his breath shallow. He didn't interrupt, didn't move. But the tears came unstoppable, and sudden years of holding back, of keeping everything neat and manageable, finally released. Haley's voice trembled for half a beat as she noticed, but she kept singing. When the song ended, she looked over her shoulder. Ethan sat with his face buried in his hands, silent. "I didn't know," she whispered. He shook his head. "You couldn't have." A long pause stretched between them. "She used to sing that every night," he said hoarsely. "I thought Lily had forgotten." Haley looked down at the little girl now sleeping peacefully in her lap. "Children don't forget love," she said. "They just wait to hear it again." He nodded slowly. There were no declarations, no confessions. But when Haley gently placed a blanket over Lily's legs and leaned her head against the back of the couch, Ethan didn't move. They sat like that for a long time, one man, one woman, and a sleeping child. Without naming what they were becoming, it was already undeniably there. 3 souls no longer separate, but quietly, steadily becoming one. The letter arrived in a plain envelope, the scholarship committee's name neatly printed at the top. Haley stared at it for a full 5 minutes before tearing it open with shaking hands. She read the first line once, then twice, then a third time, finally releasing a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Full tuition, a 1-year program, pediatric specialization out of state. It was everything she had worked for, everything she had quietly hoped for during nights when the world felt too heavy and the future seemed impossibly distant. But instead of elation, her chest tightened with a profound sense of conflict, for it meant leaving. Leaving the quiet warmth of Ethan's kitchen, leaving Lily's bedtime stories, leaving the strange, steady rhythm of something that had begun to feel almost like a life. She waited 3 days before telling him. They were at the park, Lily gleefully chasing soap bubbles, while Haley sat beside Ethan on a bench, the letter folded neatly in her coat pocket. "I got the scholarship," she said softly. Ethan turned to her, his eyebrows raised, an immediate smile gracing his lips. "Haley, that's incredible." She nodded, her eyes fixed on the ground. It's in Oregon. Starts in August for 1 year." The wind rustled through the trees, scattering golden leaves at their feet. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he simply said, "You should go." Her eyes snapped up, surprised. "You think so?" He nodded. "You earned it." "But what if," she swallowed hard, "what if you think I'm just leaving when things get good? Like I used you for stability, and now I'm walking away?" Ethan's face softened. He shook his head slowly. "Loving someone," he said, "doesn't mean holding them. It means not clipping their wings." The words resonated deeper than she had expected, settling into parts of her that still feared abandonment, still believed she had to prove her worth by staying. Haley blinked rapidly, then turned away, watching Lily chase a bubble that danced just out of reach. She left in early August. The night before her flight, Ethan invited her and Lily to dinner at his place. They ate pasta by candlelight, as Lily had insisted, and made a paper chain of "days until you come back" with one link for each week. When it was time to leave, Haley knelt down to say goodbye to Lily. But before she could speak, Lily threw her arms around Haley's neck and whispered, "You're not going far. Daddy says hearts don't care about distance." Haley closed her eyes, pulling the little girl closer. It was a goodbye, unlike any she had experienced before, one without guilt, without fear, just pure love. She looked up at Ethan, who stood by the door, hands in his pockets, his eyes unreadable, yet undeniably warm. No promises, no "wait for me," just a silent understanding. A silent acknowledgement that something real could endure the space between them, that love in its truest form does not demand proximity. Haley cried that night, not because she was being left behind, but because for the first time she was being let go without being let down. The community hospital appeared almost identical: sterile walls, the soft beeping of monitors, nurses in practical shoes hurrying between patients. Yet walking through its doors this time felt profoundly different. Haley stood at the staff entrance, clutching her new ID badge, her white coat freshly pressed, "registered nurse" boldly printed beneath her name. She had achieved it. After a year of grueling coursework, demanding night shifts, and missing home more than she ever anticipated, she was back, stronger, steadier, and more self-assured than ever before. The morning passed in a whirlwind of introductions, paperwork, and reconnecting with familiar faces from her intern days. Just before lunch, a nurse handed her a sleek white envelope. "There's an event this afternoon. You're invited," she said with a wink. The invitation was simple yet elegant. Product launch Her First Spoon, a celebration of nourishment, dignity, and second chances. Location rooftop garden. Blake Nutrition Co. Time 3:00 p.m. She knew instantly who it was from. At precisely 3:00, Haley stepped out of the elevator into the rooftop garden, an airy space adorned with flowering herbs, hanging lights, and rows of white chairs. A long table in the center showcased pastel-colored packaging, each box bearing the same soft script, "Her first spoon for the women who stayed hungry to feed hope." Haley stopped dead in her tracks, her throat tightening as she gazed at the design. It was subtle, but the silhouette on the side of the box, a woman cradling a child, close a spoon in her other hand, was unmistakably familiar. Ethan stood near the podium addressing a small crowd of investors, staff, and press. His voice was calm and focused, but when his eyes met hers across the rooftop, the corners of his mouth lifted just slightly. He finished his speech, shook a few hands, then walked directly toward her. "I wasn't sure you would come," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd still remember me," she replied softly. "Impossible," he said, his eyes warm. They stood for a moment in silence, the ambient noise of the event fading into the background. Then slowly, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. He didn't kneel, nor did he utter grand declarations. He simply opened it, revealing a delicate ring with a single, unassuming stone. "I don't want to save you," he said quietly. "I want to stay if you'll let me." Haley stared at the ring, then at Ethan. His face was older than when they first met, his eyes, still bearing the weight of his past, but now softened by something else entirely. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She simply nodded. Not because she was overwhelmed, nor because it felt like a fairy tale, but because for the first time in her life she was choosing love, not out of need or fear, but from a profound place of peace. It was a place where two people, each broken in their own ways, had become whole enough to stand side by side. And this time, neither of them was running. The soft hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the enticing scent of rosemary bread filled the very same mid-range restaurant where not long ago Haley had sat alone, nervous, hopeful, and feeling utterly invisible. But tonight, everything was different. She walked in hand with Ethan, their fingers naturally and comfortably intertwined. Lily trotted just ahead of them in her little navy dress, her pigtails bouncing with every step. The hostess greeted them warmly and led them to a familiar corner table, except this time there were 3 chairs. Ethan pulled one out for Haley, then gently helped Lily into hers. No separation, no silent observation from afar, just one table openly shared. Haley surveyed the space, the same soft lighting, the same polished wood, even the same server who had once gently inquired if she wished to order. It felt surreal. Ethan handed her the menu with a playful smile. "Order everything you want," he said. "Tonight, we eat for the girl who waited 45 minutes and still believed someone would show up." Haley let out a soft laugh, her eyes shimmering with emotion. She glanced down at the menu, then back at him. "You remember everything." "I remember you," he said simply. Just then, Lily reached into her tiny backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She proudly spread it on the table. It was a crayon drawing a small house with a yellow door, a sun with a smiling face, and 3 stick figures seated at a dinner table, one with long yellow hair, one tall with glasses, and one small with purple shoes. "This is us," Lily announced. "And that's spaghetti, because Mommy Haley likes spaghetti." Haley's breath caught. She reached across the table and gently touched the paper, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. "Did you draw this today?" she asked. Lily nodded. "At preschool, teacher said to draw our favorite thing. I picked dinner with you and Daddy." Ethan looked down at his daughter, then across at Haley. No words were needed. The simplicity of the moment spoke volumes. Candlelight flickered. Laughter from another table rippled past. A waiter placed warm bread and water on their table without interrupting the intimacy unfolding before them. Haley stared at the 2 people in front of her, the man who had once quietly paid for her dinner without a word, and the little girl who saw her not as a stranger, but as home. She reached for her glass of water, took a steadying breath, and whispered, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the kind of quiet certainty that only comes after surviving the storm. "You were never late. I just needed to believe long enough to wait." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He reached for her hand across the table, laced his fingers with hers, and nodded. Outside the restaurant, night had settled in. But inside, at one small table with 3 chairs, something profound had begun. Not a rescue, not a fairy tale, but simply 3 people, 1 table, and a future built on the quiet, simple miracle of showing up. If this story resonated with you, please consider supporting soul-stirring stories by hitting that hype button and subscribing to our channel. Every view, every like, and every share helps us bring you more heartfelt tales, much like the girl who waited 45 minutes. Because somewhere out there, someone is still waiting to be seen, to be heard, to be loved. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next story that might change everything for you. Thank you for watching, and always remember, love always finds its way to those who believe.